Welcome back to another episode of ROC Boys football. We are continuing to take a look at some of the week 2 slated games as we probably take a look at what might not be the most competitive game, but definitely the most watched game of week 2 as Alabama goes on the road playing the Texas Longhorns. Dill, I want to start off with just how good I think this Alabama team is, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. I think the preconception, and this isn't getting talked about enough, is how good Utah State was on offense last year, and they couldn't move it an inch. I don't think they threw for over 100 yards. They didn't run for over 100 yards. They limited them to under 200 yards of total offense all game. This Alabama defense, when you look at it, every single line on that, the defensive line, stacked, backers stacked. Secondary might be the best unit on this team. I don't see how Texas moves the ball in Alabama. That's my first takes. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this game.
I mean, when you have an edge rush pair as good as this, which might be as good as we've ever seen in like the history of football, and Dallas Turner's a young guy, but he's coming on. And I mean, last year as a true freshman looked awesome. Obviously has all the tools. If he takes the next step, who's going to have had a better edge rushing tandem?
No,
I mean, it'll be even better than Michigan last year. Michigan had an incredible one last year. So
Dallas Turner, as a true freshman, looked way better than I would have thought. I mean, he came in kind of as like a raw athlete. By the end of the year, he was a legit bona fide pass rusher at the SEC level, and he's certainly going to look like it this year.
And that's going to be a huge issue because, I mean, if you watch Texas, you know they're not good enough up front. Like, their offensive line last year kind of slowed that team down a little bit just because – you have so much skill on the edge, but if you can't protect and it's not like I don't think Texas O-line is bad like maybe an LSU or a Florida State. Shout out tonight's game, but they're not good enough. Like they're not great, and this is a team that you need to be great to even have a chance of being able to sit in the pocket for a couple seconds periodically because these two are so good.
This isn't even an indictment on Texas. I think this Texas team is talented enough to win the Big 12. There's not a single team, I think, in the country outside of maybe Georgia that I would take within 7 points of Alabama. That's how good I think this Alabama team is. Even with how good Georgia looked against Oregon, this Alabama team, especially on the defense side of the ball, is different. I really do. You combine that with a Heisman Trophy winner on the other side of the ball. I think this Alabama defense is elite. I just don't know where Texas is going to be able to win matchups.
I mean, realistically, the way Texas would be able to score is some big plays because there's 4 or 5 guys. I mean, you think an Xavier Worthy, Bijan Robinson, Roschon Johnson even, I think is a guy who can make some explosive
You could
plays.
throw in the boy Jatavian Sanders, who looked absolutely
insane. So you got like guys who you need to hit some of those plays, but again, you just have an Alabama team. This isn't like those young Alabama teams that lost a ton to the draft. Like they're getting everybody back pretty much. You got a guy in the middle in Toto who's been in college playing great football for forever. You have 3 safeties, Branch, Moore, in Battle, all NFL players. I just don't see where you're going to find the breakdowns you need to put the points up because I just don't see Texas marching on them. And if they can't hit 3 or 4 70-yard touchdowns, I think it's going to be really hard to score more than 20 points.
I agree. I think Texas, if they want to cover the spread, they want to make this game competitive, it needs to come with some explosive plays, probably Xavier Worthy, probably Bijan Robinson. You look at what you need for explosive plays. You need breakdowns in the secondary. You have 3 kind of D-backs. You have more than that, but Brian Branch, Malachi Moore, Jordan Battle.
Throw Eli Ricks in there, another guy who's played a ton of football.
Kool-Aid McKinstry. Like, I don't see that happening enough on the back end. And then I certainly don't see Quinn Ewers having enough time in the pocket to let some of those plays develop. And I don't see Bijan Robinson.
Quinn Ewers is not a guy you can move around enough to like. Yeah. Maybe if you have a Bryce Young, a guy who's really slippery in the pocket and can get outside and make plays, but Ewers didn't look wildly athletic against ULM. And yeah, I don't see if you can't get him moving and throwing and making some escape plays. I think it's going to be very hard to kind of dissect this Alabama defense.
That's probably my biggest concern for Texas moving forward is the offensive line. I think is probably the weakest part of this offense. You look at quarterback, Quinn Ewers is a beast. Like the arm talent that this guy has, he's still learning the game a little bit. I'll give him that. But the dripping with arm talent, what he can do with the football, nobody really else can in the country. You have probably the best running back. You have the best running back, probably the best running back room as a whole, and then very good receiving core and pass catchers. I don't know if Quinn Ewers is going to be able to kind of be talked about South Carolina. Like it's all good and well to have all those options on the outside with a great quarterback. If you can't protect, it doesn't really matter. I'm worried about Quinn Ewers' ability to get outside the pocket, extend plays, give his receivers time to create some separation. That's probably my biggest concern. It's certainly going to be a concern in this game. I don't really know how that's going to work.
Yeah, and that seems like the problem. It's just where if you can't hit a couple of those big plays, I think they're going to really struggle to move.
So Alabama on offense. The biggest concern we had was who's catching footballs. Jermaine Burton comes in. We had a few guys who weren't really on my radar kind of step up against Utah State. I think you're going to see Jahmyr Gibbs get a little bit more active in the pass game as well. He only had one catch for 5 yards, I believe, against Utah State. I mean, Bryce Young is going to make it work. I could be running routes out there for Bryce Young, and he'd make it work. So I'm not too concerned with that. I think they'll put up points against Texas. I think they'll be able to run the football with Jahmyr Gibbs. They probably got to score 40 points to cover. I don't see Texas scoring 3 touchdowns against this Alabama team. That's how good I think this defense can be. If they can score 40, I think they're covering the spread here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Texas gave up 40 to a lot of teams last year. So I think they never saw an offense even in the realm of what Alabama can be. So I don't see that Texas got that much better on defense. Like, I think they're getting better. I think, Tom Herman had that defense going in the wildly wrong direction. I mean, they're still trying to build that up, but I don't think they've caught up to what an offense that's as good as we've seen with the added dimension of Jahmyr Gibbs, who might be as dynamic of a running back as anyone Bama's had since Trent Richardson, maybe. It's hard to think because they've had those big hammers in the past, like the Derrick Henrys, the B-Robs, like guys who are really good. But Gibbs is a different animal and much more explosive.
That's what I'm waiting. So I don't think they showed their cards against Utah State. The cards might come out against Texas. I'm very interested to see what they do with Jahmyr Gibbs on the offense because he's a guy that he can run between the tackles, but I think he's at his best when he's at his best at Georgia Tech. He's outside in space, making people miss. He's got extremely good speed and quickness. I'm interested to see what they do with that. And then just continue to see that development with the chemistry between Bryce Young and the pass catchers. I think the offensive line is going to hold up. Texas, I think, looked better on the defensive line against ULM. I think it's going to be a good test to see if that defensive line and that unit as a whole got more physical, got tougher, because that's the biggest question mark they had. You're gonna see a lot of answers for both of these teams. The question with Alabama, who's stepping up as a pass catcher? We didn't really see anybody really emerge against Utah State. And then on Texas, are they more physical up front? Can they tackle in space better? You're going to see those questions be answered that they weren't really answered in week 1. As far as a bet, I don't really have a bet. I don't love laying 3 scores against Texas's offense, but I don't really think I want to bet Texas to cover and make this game close either. I think I'm going to use this game as let's learn about these two teams who we hopefully can make some money on later in the season. But I'm just going to sit back, enjoy some of the best quarterback play we'll see all year, some of the best wide receivers, some of the best running backs, be a college football fan.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like this game, if you're a college football fan, I don't think you need like action on it to love. No. This is just like 2 premier programs, at least big name, whatever, history, all that. In just whenever those big cross-conference rivals bump up on each other, always really fun. And I mean, how are you going to bet? It's like I hate the idea of taking Alabama to cover that many points against a team like Texas, but I also like Nick Saban. He's a guy who likes pounding teams into the ground. He's always done that.
Especially when one of the opposing coaches.
Exactly. I mean, if he can jump on a Lane Kiffin, he's going to do it. If he can jump on a Sark, he's going to do it. And I think there's a chance that he kind of tries to do that here. And you also watch him. He's screaming at Bryce Young after he jogs off of a touchdown play. It's like everything he wants to be perfect. It doesn't matter what point in the game. He wants him scoring and he wants him executing. So it's a team that you don't like betting to not cover because they've been covering for 12 years and they've been beating teams down really viciously for a very long time.
You don't make money betting against Alabama. That's for sure. I think a couple of things. The dogs aren't going to be called off. I don't think so. I don't think this is a game where you have a ton of recruits watching. You have all the national media watching. You want to put a statement on this game. This isn't a game where you're coaching to keep you guys healthy. You're coaching to make a statement and say, we're the best team in the country and we're going to show everybody. Second of all, you're right. Nick Saban, He's not going to accept any bad quarter. Like fourth quarter, we're chilling with our twos in. No, that's not what's going to happen.
Fantastic video of him screaming at his punt team like they're up 15-0.
You know who needs to take notes? I'm going to say I said on the phone. Mac Brown, take some notes, add some discipline. I saw, and this is just kind of a side note before we get out of here. Mac Brown, absolute joke of a coach. I mean, we ended up cashing the bet on UNC, but that was some of the most poorly managed. And he's out there dancing in the locker room with his teammates after legit being publicly embarrassed. Like, you as a coach had way more talent than App State, and you won by 2 points on a 2-point conversion. Buddy, get it together. Don't dance. Start yelling at your guys to play better. That's kind of my take. Had to fire that off because I'm still a little bit hot about it. Yeah, I don't think you're going to see Nick Saban call the dogs off. I don't think this is a game where you're going to call the dogs off. That's for Utah State. This is Alabama, Texas. You're going to see a very good game. If I am taking a bet, it is Alabama to cover the points. That being said, I'm not taking Alabama to cover 3 touchdowns. We appreciate you guys rocking with the ROC Boys as usual. If you do like the content, consider subscribing to the channel, man. We do appreciate all of you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.